about why I can prove to you, more or less definitively, that 2022 is the very best Patrick Mahomes has ever been. Let's talk some Chiefs, guys. Welcome to the Chief of the North on RGR Football. I am Srth Keysor, Chief of the North, Minnesota Chiefs fan, but mostly just Seth. As we do every week here, we're here to talk some Chiefs. We have a preseason game coming up on Sunday where we finally get some new film to break down. I could not be more excited. I think I'm probably going to be able to have a little bit of access to Small 22 to really take a closer look at the receivers. That's what everyone's going to want to hear about. I'm aware. We'll be able to look at the film, maybe a little bit of what Drew Tranquil does with the defense, although I'm guessing we won't see a ton of starters. But there's going to be just so much. You get an opportunity to see some of the young guys in not just in pads, but in an actual live firing game situation where everyone is really trying their hardest. And it's not coaching points. You're trying to win the rep. There's a lot to learn there. So I'm going to be writing about things that I'm going to be watching for and not really watching for with regards to the first preseason game. But I'm just excited for it. I can't believe football's back. It feels like this was one of the shortest off seasons that I can remember, which is probably what happens when your team just keeps playing in February over and over and over again. As I do every week, also got some mailbag questions. We're going to go over that. And then I want to talk about the most recent article in the Chief of the North newsletter, which is unlocked for everyone to read because it's a pretty big piece, and it's one that I actually really want people to have access to, whether they decide to subscribe or not. Of course, I hope you do. But I want people to really have context for Patrick Mahomes' play in 2022. We're going to get to that and talk about why, stats, even in-depth stats, don't really tell the story, and why the methodology I use, I think, is superior in terms of figuring out exactly what the quarterback did. But first, we're going to get to some mailbag questions. I'm not doing Twitter ones this week because I want to talk about the Mahomes article. I'm going to go to the comment section from last week, just like every other week. Those questions get priority. I'll always answer those. Try to put a question mark on the front of it to let me know whether it's Chiefs-related, football in general, or whatever. I don't care. I'll answer pretty much anything. Please don't test that theory. Now that I've said that, you're going to test that theory, so we should have some fun with that. So we're just going to go through a few of those. Then we're going to talk about the Patrick Mahomes article. I also would note, as of currently, right this second, there's no updates on Chris Jones. Nate Taylor wrote a great article kind of about where the team's coming from. You're starting to see some of that. It's not necessarily, and Nate would be the first to say this, it's not necessarily news that the Chiefs aren't going to reset the defensive tackle market with Jones's deal, like as in going above and beyond Aaron Donald's deal. Right now, what you've got is you've got Donald's deal, you've got the next biggest one. There's a huge gap between the two of them, and what the parties are fighting over is where should they be in the spectrum. Jones obviously thinks he should be where Donald is. The Chiefs want him to be closer to Quentin Williams, Jeffrey Simmons, that sort of thing, and that's just tough because Jones was the best defensive lineman in football last year, arguably, and that's just really, really hard in order for people to come to an agreement when both sides have leverage. And that's exactly what's happening right now. All right, let's look at some mailbag questions. Someone complimented my vocabulary, which I really appreciate. Aragorn7233 says, and this is something I just wanted to address. So last week I talked about schemed touchdowns, and I referenced Sky Moore's. And he responded, Sky Moore's touchdown was not a schemed touchdown because they were in the wrong formation. And Mahomes just went ahead with it instead of calling a timeout. That everyone, including Moore, kept their wits about them, speaks to Mahomes' leadership and his teammates trusting him. I would say it's still a scheme touchdown. This wasn't Sky Moore beating man coverage. This wasn't, an incredible throw into a tight window or anything like that. This wasn't an individual win. This was they broke the Eagles' coverage rules. That's what I mean by a scheme touchdown, where because of how you line up and because of how you execute the play call, the other team is placed at a schematic disadvantage. A reverse type situation for that would be if, because of a simulated pressure that Spags runs, let's say, Mike Dana goes completely unblocked because they found a way to break the scheme protection calls of the other team, or there's, there's just blown blocks, but I'm talking more if you found a way to scheme them into leaving an unblocked rusher. That's not a win by Mike Dana. That's a win by the defensive coordinator. And so with Sky Moore, same as with Kadarius Toney, those touchdowns more broke their coverage rules in a way they weren't prepared for than it was an individual win for Sky Moore. So when I'm talking about players winning a rep, versus being schemed open for a rep. That's what I mean. It doesn't necessarily mean that the call went exactly how it was designed. It means more that because of the design, it created that opportunity for the player rather than the player creating an opportunity for himself. Now, that's not necessarily a knock. A lot of plays are like that, but it's just something to take into account when you're trying to gauge an individual player, which is what we're trying to do in preseason. All right. Lev Mass asks, Seth, if you had the power to rewrite history for the specific purpose. Ooh, here, I'll try to do something here. You guys can sort of see this. Seth, if you had the power to rewrite history, and I know I should be able to bring that up onto your screen, but I am what I am, and I'm a football guy and not a tech guy, so maybe one of these days I'll learn it. Seth, if you had the power to rewrite reality and history for the specific purpose of giving one underappreciated overlooked player a guaranteed Hall of Fame career, who would you choose? I think maybe a personal favorite of yours for whatever reason never got the chance because they struggled with injuries or put in rough circumstances with coaches' teams, or maybe just a super good dude that didn't quite have the talent to cut it. There are a few players from the previous Chiefs era, kind of the beginning of the pre-Mahomes era, that I'm very fond of in Derek Johnson and Tamba Hali and Jamal Charles and Eric Berry. Jamal Charles is the easy choice for me. I am very vocal now that he's eligible. I'm very vocal about Jamal Charles belonging in the Hall of Fame. He is the best in history at moving the ball. When your job is to move the ball and you have 5 seasons of high-level production, that should be enough. This isn't like he only had one great season. And I've argued that extensively elsewhere, and I'll continue to push that issue because I think raising awareness is something that matters. I think Jamal Charles does belong in the Hall of Fame, but if I could guarantee it for anyone, it would be Charles. Simply because I think he definitively deserves it, and I'm afraid because of longevity stats, he won't get it. And he's probably my favorite Chiefs player in history, which of course plays a role here. He kind of he came onto the scene before this became a job for me, and he was still with the Chiefs as this became a job, and I became a lot more analytical and had good people teaching me a little more about the game to where I could understand a little better what made him so great. And so he kind of intersects 2 eras of my fanhood for me, and that's part of what makes it special for me in terms of viewing him as a player. Plus, he really was that great. And so let's see. Jesse Joseph Knox asks, Seth, 2 questions. 1, if you had to assign a percentage to Nico Remigio, making the 53, what would that be? And 2, do you watch Suits? I'll go in reverse. I do not watch Suits. I've heard of it. I'm told it's quite entertaining. So maybe I will at some point here. With the first one, that percentage would be close to 0. They're already going to need to come up with a roster spot, maybe an extra one, because I mean we've done this before, right? But you've got MVS for sure, you've got Toney, you've got Moore, you've got Rice. Those 4 guys are just complete automatics, right? Justin Watson is very likely they signed him to a 2-year deal. He's getting a ton of first-team reps. Andy Reid likes him a lot. So then you got 5 and 6. You got Richie James, who they seem to like, who's had a pretty good training camp, is an okay-ish NFL vet, and can help keep the floor just completely bottoming out in the receiver room if the young guys don't work out. And then you've got Justin Ross, who's had a really strong training camp and has a ton of talent. That's 7 guys. And so I just don't know where there's room for anyone else to make the actual 53, probably be a practice squad guy. Ryan White with his weekly quest to get MVS off the team. I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. Just because you said it a little while ago, I'm coming across the MVS hater. And so now I'm just going to lean into that. He says, I meant MVS is $10 million coming off the books next year, going a long way to retain Steve. So Ryan had asked about whether or not I thought getting rid of MVS, if the young guys work out, would be a good idea in terms of next year. If the young guys work out really, really well, and one of them at least shows the ability to be a really consistent deep threat, and in the meantime, the 2 other guys come into where you've got 3 competent to good receivers, and at least one of them is a legitimate, consistent deep threat, then yeah, I could see them doing it. So that makes more sense. in terms of how to proceed. But that's kind of like your best case scenario. That's if like Rice and Moore or Rice and Ross or Moore and Ross, two of them work out. One of them is a terrific deep threat or at least a good deep threat. Then maybe I think you can go that route. But otherwise, it's just tough to get rid of a competent NFL receiver with a valuable skill set like MBS has in terms of that deep threat ability. Josh Harmon says we should all donate to get Srth a better webcam. I'm looking into that. I promise. I will look into that because I understand you guys have to deal with blurring me and all that kind of stuff. Which, by the way, it just means a lot to me that you guys are willing to watch and interact and have fun with this, purely based on what we're talking about, not any flash or style, because I have none. Andrew Giles says, Srth, I think Nick's great value to the team as a run stuffer, so other teams can't play keep away from Mahomes. I totally understand where you're coming from there. I actually did a couple of studies a while back as to whether or not running the ball is the correct way to play the Chiefs to try to kill the clock. And what I found was because running the ball is generally not very efficient, even if you're a bad run defense, even then, so let's say a team averages 6 yards per carry against the Chiefs, just a fiasco of a game, right? Well, the thing is, it's not 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, etc., right? It's 1 and then 9 and then 2 and then 11 and then 5 and then -1 and that sort of stuff. So ultimately, what happens with the run game in all but the most unusual of circumstances, you have to be able to throw. You have to be able to hit second and third and long, and that pass defense becomes more paramount, even with a strong run game. So that's one reason why that doesn't necessarily work to play keep away, because you're still going to have some drives where you just go 3 and out because running the ball is so much less efficient overall, right? Maybe you run on first down and now it's second and -12 because of an unusually good play by whether it's Chris Jones, Willie Gay Jr., whoever, right? Or you just gain nothing. Now it's second and 10. Can you really afford to run and risk a 1-yard gain? Now it's third and long. You've got to throw the ball. So eventually the pass defense does become paramount, even if you're running the ball well over the course of the game. So that's one reason why the run game doesn't necessarily work to play keep away from Mahomes, because it's not efficient enough overall. The second thing is you got to remember that even when you've got one team that's playing this plodding ball control style, on the other side is Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs offense. And so let's say you have this, and it's like the perfectly ideal 15-play, 10-minute drive that ends in a touchdown even, right? Which if it doesn't end in a touchdown, if it only ends in a field goal, that can be a little bit of a loss depending on the game circumstances. But let's say you have all that happen, and then the Chiefs score a touchdown on a 2-minute drive. Then what you've tried to do, because remember, you're always giving the ball back, barring turnovers. It just goes one team, one team, one team, one team. So you don't not only need your offense to execute this ball control style, but you need your defense to be able to force like basically 3 and outs, or force the Chiefs to do 10-minute drives in their own right to limit possessions. Because it's not about keeping the ball away from any amount of time. It's about limiting number of possessions, because you always swap the ball back. And what I found is the difference is less than that of a single possession when teams try to play that way. And it's just because running the ball is not efficient enough, and the Chiefs have Mahomes and their own offense, because it has to do both ways for that to work. So Bolton does have value to the team, certainly. But there's a reason why stopping the run is always going to be less important than stopping the pass in the modern NFL, unless you become historically bad against the run consistently, which is frankly hard to do in the current NFL. Adam Jensen says these intros are just out of control troll at this point. Yeah, you're not wrong. All right, so we've dealt with some of your questions. I didn't keep enough of them on the screen. I'm sorry for that, but I want to talk to you about the yearly Patrick Mahomes film review. Again, this is available on the Chief of the North. I'm not trying to sell you a sub. I mean, sure, subscribe. I'd love it if you did. There's a button there to do it for $12 a year forever. But the reason I unlock these every year is because, here, I want to watch this. Man, that's pretty. Anyway, the reason I do this is because I want people to have information. And so I would assume most of you who watch this are probably familiar with the methodology I use to chart quarterback play. But I just want to reinforce the reason why I do it the way that I do it. For me, it's about finding a way to quantify what really matters from a quarterback's play. And things like accuracy, pocket presence, vision and awareness, reading defenses pre and post snap, playmaking, ball protection. Those are the big things. If you do that well, you'll be a good quarterback consistently, right? Now, the thing is about statistical analysis, even more in-depth ones like, yards above replacement and EPA per play and that kind of stuff, all of them are subject to results. And what I mean by that is it's about the what happened, generally speaking, right? And the what happened is important, of course, it's particularly over time. The longer you've got a bigger sample size for what happened, the more you can say this quarterback's good because year after year after year after year after year, he is doing things well. The problem with football is it's inherently a small sample size sport. Even the course of one game, you've got like 50 snaps or so, maybe like 40 dropbacks. It's not a large sample size, and even over the course of an entire year, it's still not huge. So what I try to do, and so then you're subject to weird things happening in terms of statistics. A 1 yard screen becomes an 80-yard touchdown can really mess with things in an individual game, and even over the course of the entire season in terms of total expected points added, DVOA, and all of these things. Okay, so what I do is I chart things that try to quantify those things that are important to quarterback plays and yards created. That's where a play is broken down. No one's open, or there's pressure, or both. The play call didn't really work. Do you have the ability to create on that play and create extra yards? And so, on average in 2022, Mahomes had 5 created plays for 61 yards per game. So those are 61 yards just out of thin air, which is an incredible number, by the way. When I went back and looked at, this was years ago for The Athletic, I mean, most quarterbacks, maybe even the great ones, they'll have 20 or 30, except like some of the crazy scrambler guys, and then they fall short in other ways, and we'll get to that. Franchise throws, I think Pro Football Focus calls them big time throws. Other people might call them really, 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 really good throws. It's basically, when you see it, multiple read plays, that's self-explanatory. Accuracy in and out of the pocket, or inaccuracy in and out of the pocket, self-explanatory. A number of times a quarterback got flushed. That's flush of the pocket, pressure before anyone comes open. That by looking at that, like if a quarterback had like 25 flushes in a game, right, or something crazy, that tells you, it tells the story of the game, right? How the team affected his statistical performance. Drops and yards lost, potential interceptions. If a quarterback makes a terrible throw and it hits the defensive back in the hands and the defensive back dropped it, the quarterback didn't do anything to make that a non-negative play. And so that's why I look at that, because it allows us to really gauge how the quarterback played. Happy feet snaps when you bail out of a clean pocket, or you create pressure on your own, and accuracy percentage. So I look at all those things, and that's what this 2022 review does. So I look at those things, and then I average them out. I'm trying to gesture at the screen here, but I'll just do this. I average them out over the course of the year, and I compare them to his 2018 numbers, his 2021 numbers. The other thing that I do, see this. So this is an example of an accuracy, a throw made with tremendous accuracy that matters a great deal. You see this placement, it goes to the back hip of Kelsey. That's a franchise throw right there, because it's tough to make. You have to make it with anticipation. You have to put it in the exact right spot. You've got to put it with a certain amount of zip on it. It's just an incredibly tough throw to make. But it's also an example of how accuracy and placement matters just as much as whether a throw was completed or not. Let's say Kelsey couldn't have hung on to this. It still would have been an incredible play by Mahomes, but the stat sheet wouldn't have shown it. So then the other thing that I do is I show game by game what the numbers look like, because I think it's important to show your work. So that's what's live right now on the Chief of North newsletter. You should check it out. Here's the short answer. And I won't go through all the numbers. You can check it out in there. Here's from 2018 and 2021. What you will find, his 2022 numbers were the best of his career. And they improved on basically everything you'd want to see improvement on. One thing you see less of than you did in 2018 is franchise throws. And you see the explanation for that with his increased accuracy, and fewer potential interceptions, fewer missed shots, fewer happy feet. He's not forcing the issue as much. So here's what I will say. Go check out that article. I genuinely think you'll really enjoy it. I enjoy writing it every year, so that's why I think that. it also gives you a lot of ammunition to talk to people about quarterback play in a more real way, as opposed to kind of the stuff that gets thrown around that's either purely statistics or just kind of nonsense. So the biggest takeaway, though, is that in 2022, Patrick Mahomes really found that balance of being an incredible playmaker when he has to be and taking the play that's there when he doesn't have to be. He really is like that best version of himself. It's hard to picture him getting better. I did write about a couple things he could still improve on, but basically his highest level qualities, he is one of a kind. There's 2 or 3 things that he's one of a kind at in the league. Then there's multiple other qualities where he's elite and right up there with the best in the league. And then there's other qualities where he's good. That's about as bad as it gets for him, is good. So check that out. I had a lot of fun writing it, and hopefully some of the explanation here provides you with some context before you go and read it. And again, you can just find it at mnchiefsfan.substack.com, and it is open and available for everyone to read. All right, that's the time I have. I went over, as always. I appreciate you guys a great deal. It is a terrific week to be a Chiefs fan, and I can't wait to be back next week talking about preseason film.